I don't remember that ever being true. Maybe you're in a different. I don't think we ever had problems with the water quality. Maybe in a different town down south.
We did have some problems that the city used to supply, because we did it with our washing machine. The city used to supply a certain powder that would take rust out of the water, and it did taste differently. Is there anybody else who wants to follow up on this? Looking at opening our wells? Alderman Woods.
I think that actually testing the water does, I've talked to Al and John and a couple other people, and it's not because we didn't test it in the past. A lot of different rules and laws have come down. We don't know what the water is like down there now. That's an issue, the legal issues, the battle going in and out, the money residents would have to spend. And I agree with the alderman. I would love to do that. I don't think it's worth it this time to expend too much time or money to research that, because I think after we get through spending the money on the research, we'll find out that it's really cost prohibitive and not practical to do. So I personally would not be in favor of expending any great amount of time or money to research it. Thank you.
Any other comments? Alderman Eugene Wesley, did you raise your? Oh, okay. So tonight, all we're doing is making a recommendation to staff to continue with the treatment plant construction and engineering. And the money for it, go ahead, Mr. Wilson.
Just before we get too far down that train, is there direction, because I know we have 1 for and 1 against, so is there a direction, is there a consensus on the well issue before we get on to other stuff?
Is there anybody else that has an opinion on it?
Anybody that wants it.
I guess 1 to 1 fails, and I'm sorry.
That's okay. But just fine. We'll see what the city does next. Chicago.
Yeah, we have to wait and see what they do. So the direction would be, we don't need a motion. The direction would be to continue on the, looking at the state funding grants, and that'll be updated
Presentation, right?
in November, is that correct,
They have a presentation.
Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I guess conceptually, if it would just go up and down, that'd be great. But we do have a presentation from Back Schulman to go through some of the findings of the water study, and want to make sure that everybody's on board with the way we're going for the treatment plant. And we'd kind of like, because if you, in the memo, there was 7 different recommendations in there, 4 of which directly relate to the treatment plant, a couple of which can bleed over into the DuPage Water Commission topic. So we'd like to get 1, 3, and 4 addressed, which are for the treatment plant,
Certainly.
before we get too far down. So, and just consider, I know this has changed a little bit from Friday to Tuesday. It changed, and while I'll apologize for the changes, I'll also say that if there's one thing that's going to be certain between now and the time that we break ground on phase 1, is that's going to change again. It could change on Tuesday when we get the cost estimates on the 90% completed from HR Green. It could change when we get the 100% completed from HR Green. It could change when we get the lowest bidder and it's $1 million or $500,000 either way.
Good evening. All right, so we're going to run through a few slides here. You've got a copy of each of the slides in front of you. As Brad said, I'm Kristen Ray, project manager for the rate study. Robin Dozier is our operations department manager. She's a certified water and wastewater system operator and provides a lot of insight on budgeting and capital improvements, and so that's how we kind of attack these. So as you can see from the title, the big focus with the rate study, as we've already talked about, is the wastewater treatment plant first and foremost, and the other projects that are also included in the city's 5-year CIP, including water mains, sewer improvements, water storage, things like that. Those are all projects that have been prioritized as being important and needed in the next 5 years. So we were tasked to come up with what it would take to fund all of those projects, given certain assumptions. As Alderman Wesley mentioned, the bonding for the first phase of the wastewater treatment plant improvements, the Illinois EPA loan for the second phase, and funding the rest of the projects in your capital improvement plan directly from your rates without additional borrowing. So those are the big things really driving the rate study, and we'll go through that. Let's see, is this gonna work? We need to switch, he said maybe switch it on and off. Oh, it's off. There we go. So to summarize and to start out, the city's decision to conduct a rate study was based on several factors. First and foremost, you've got to prove to the bonding agency or the bank, whoever's financing your first phase, as well as EPA for your second phase, that you have the financial wherewithal to repay this debt. And so the rate study specifically needs to show that, so that you have that in hand, ready when the funding comes through, to prove that you can repay the funding. And like I said, funding is also needed for several other important projects, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. And on top of everything else, of course, the cost of all your commodities and your contractual services are increasing every year, not the least of which is the DuPage Water Commission raising your water rates, but everything else is increasing with inflation as well. And so it's trying to wrap all those factors into one recommendation for a 5-year rate program. And like we just talked about, DuPage Water Commission, Chicago is proposing to raise their water rates by a cumulative total of 90% over the next 4 years. DuPage Water Commission is doing a little more on top of that. Their total 4-year increase is 116%, because they need to phase out the sales tax revenue that currently supports a portion of their operations. And so what we're going to show you is rate increases to handle the city's current expenses with normal inflation. Okay, so that's basically everything except the DuPage Water Commission rate increases, and then those would be directly on top of the rates. So we're going to focus on the city's needs first and what those rates are, and then after that we'll look at the actual dollar amounts that the Water Commission is proposing to raise your water rates, and that would be on top. These are the current rates, just so we all know where we're starting from. Water rate per 1,000 gallons is a little bit higher than the sewer rate, and you'll see that shifting as we move forward, where most of your new expenses are on the sewer side, obviously for the wastewater plant. And then you've got the fixed charge for water and sewer of $281 per month, so the total is $562 that everybody pays on their bill, regardless how much water they use. And so now we're going to start getting into some of the numbers. These are the things that are really need to be kept in mind when you're looking at your future rates. The first thing is the debt service for the first phase of construction at your wastewater plant. And just for simplicity, we refer to it as phase 1, phase 2. You know, the first phase, second phase. I think in the engineering drawings it's actually 1A and 1B, but 1 and 2 seemed a little simpler. So the first phase, the debt service right now is conservatively estimated at $695,000 a year. Now, that's not projected to actually increase your overall costs, because as the engineering costs for the wastewater plant drop off as that work is completed, then this first phase of debt service then starts after that. So it's no net increase to your overall costs. So that's not really a big driver of the rate increases now. It's more of a long-term thing to consider, that you always have to be able to make that debt service payment in the future as all your other costs go up.
This is at 4 or 4.5%, the numbers we're
That's
getting?
at 4.5, so it's conservative. the next phase of the wastewater plant, that's the big additional expense. That's the $13 million is about what it's estimated at right now. And assuming 2.5% interest rate, right now it's a little lower, but again, we wanted to be conservative. That comes out to a debt service of about $965,000 a year. And so that would start in fiscal year 2015, because the nice thing about an Illinois EPA loan is that you don't have to start repaying it until 6 months after construction is finished. So you get a little bit of extra time to get your rate increases to get the revenue up to that level that'll support that. And then the third thing on there is that you've got other capital needs on top of that, and I think it's the next slide, we'll highlight those. But the upshot is that there are going to be some rate increases needed over the next 5 years to ensure your debt service coverage and also to move forward with the other capital projects that you've prioritized as being important and needed in this near-term period. And this is just to give you a little extra background. I think a lot of the information was already explained by Brad and with what I've discussed, but just to show you how you arrive at the debt service payment for the first phase of the wastewater plant. And this is the setup for the debt service cost for the second phase. And the thing with Illinois EPA loans is it's pretty standard for them to wrap in the engineering cost with the actual construction cost, and so they give you a loan for the full amount. And then once construction begins, you get a reimbursement for the design engineering fees that you have already fronted, that you've already paid out. Those would come in, maybe anywhere from 30 to 90 days after construction starts. There's always a lag with EPA reimbursing the costs that you've already paid. I'm sorry, was there a question?
30 days. I'll turn the check around in 30 days. What they told me.
It usually they're a little slower at first. There's usually maybe a 60 or even 90-day lag for the first reimbursement. After that, they usually get a little better, and then it's usually more like closer to 30 days, not always exactly 30. It's when you're first starting it out that it's a little slower. These are some of the additional projects that I mentioned in addition to the wastewater plant. There's annual work plan to address infiltration and inflow into your sanitary sewers, to tighten them up, to reduce the wet weather peak flows that you see at your wastewater plants. And the costs you see in the furthest right column are the 5-year total that we're looking at. So obviously those are staged over the years.
I have a question on the what word did you just use? The I&I. There's also, we found out down in Springfield with the I&I, there's also grant money, or there's low-interest loans for the I&I study.
Mm-hmm.
So, just for you guys know, we found out down there when we were down there, there's money to do repairs for I&I. So, we might want to consider that somewhere in this proposal, what you're proposing here. So we need to look at that option too, that there's that low interest loan for that portion, or I don't know if he said it was a grant or a loan. I can't remember. A loan. So we go ahead and look at that loan and how much it would cost. And we need to do a research on that too. And the guy said he was going to send me the info on that, but I haven't got that yet. So keep that in mind.
Right, and there's different levels of, what qualifies or what puts you to the top of the list, and so it certainly bears looking into for that type of improvement. Next is the distribution system. There's several water main replacements that are prioritized over the next 5 years. There's also improvements planned for the booster stations. I think also an improvement at one of the PRV stations, right? The pressure reducing station. So the bulk of that cost, though, is for water main replacement. Wastewater treatment, other than the improvements at the North Plant, there are a few equipment upgrades that are needed for your belt filter presses that dewater the solids, and there's also some tank covers that have been programmed in there at the south plant, right? Water storage, there's a couple storage tanks that need to be repainted, repaired. That's something that becomes necessary on a cyclical period, and those happen to be due for repainting. And then the last line is the Irving Park Road water main and the Tower 1 replacement. Those were projects identified in your recent water system study, and those were recommended for the 5th year. So I know the city has already applied for an Illinois EPA low-interest loan for the Irving Park water main, and we'd assume that the tower would receive the same loan application as well. It hasn't fallen in that cycle yet. The next pre-application for that is in March. So assuming that, then, basically the only costs that you see in the 5-year period that we're looking at are the costs to design those improvements. Again, like we said, with Illinois EPA loans, you don't start repaying it until after the construction's finished. So the repayment on that loan is beyond the 5-year window of our study, but the design costs are included in the 5-year cost projection. So just so you know when those costs are coming in. So those are recommendations for the out years. Obviously, there's time to prioritize and review those improvements. That's a newer addition to the plan.
Could we go back to that, Irving Park water main replacement? That was water main replacement for the entire Irving Park Road? So, again, that number could be lower due to the fact is that we got the approval for the safety loop money to do that water replacement line. And I don't know how far it's going to go, so that number could be lower than $7 million. And then that's the new tower, the water tower we look at. So if we choose to get rid of the tower, okay, so that number is going to change on a water main replacement on Irving then. That ain't the right number up there.
It could. Brad, Linda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Manager Murmas whispered that to me as well. And so again, that's one of those worst case scenarios where we're pretty sure that we're going to be able to use some of that money from the, so yeah, that's going to come down. Just on the tower, if we don't do the tower, then part of that money is going to have to go into the line above it to repaint the current tower. But there will be a reduction there again as well. But as Kristen said, that's out in year 5, so that'll get vetted out as we go through the process of the CIP the next few years.
Thanks. So anyway, that's a summary of the other projects that are influencing these 5-year rate projections, along with the wastewater plant. So I'll go ahead and review the projected rates at this point. What's listed up there in the first column, those are your current rates. Again, so we know where we're starting from. The first year, fiscal year 2013, the proposed rate increases are already in your existing ordinance, and so we'd recommend you go through with those as they're already in the ordinance right now. And then fiscal year 2014 is a rate freeze across the board. And the reason that you can afford to do it that year is because, based on the assumptions we're using, you get an Illinois EPA loan for your second phase of your wastewater plant. That's the year that you get the reimbursement for all the design engineering fees that the city has already fronted the money for. So that money that's been paid out of the water and sewer fund is now coming back in, and it's replenishing your balance a little bit. So you can kind of pass that on to your customers by freezing the rates for a year. And again, this is exclusive of what the Water Commission is doing. We'll show those rates on top of this in a few slides from now. And then the last 3 years, the water rate is held constant. Again, this is the city's component of the water rate. And all the increases would go in the sewer rate because, again, that's where your new costs, that's where the bulk of your new costs are showing up. the debt service to start repaying the Illinois EPA loan starts in fiscal year 2015. So you would keep increasing the rates for those last 3 years. And again, like Brad said, we're kind of trying to hit a moving target right now. So those rates that you see right there, those will definitely have to be reevaluated every year. You know, as you bid out these improvements, as you get your funding secured and you know the exact terms and you know the exact repayment costs, then you can finalize those numbers. So it's a conservative estimate at this point. You know, we would hope that the increases wouldn't go any higher than that. We think we've been conservative in what we've estimated. And then the other thing, this shows how the monthly bills would be impacted in the future. And what we try to do was spread out the rate increases as much as possible and try and be even in the distribution rather than, you know, a big jump up and then nothing. And, you know, you don't want to be disjointed. It seems to work if you spread it out as much as possible. That's a low residential monthly bill. Right now it's $30 a month if you use 2,000 gallons. It's water and sewer combined. So with the increase that's already planned in your ordinance for next year, that would go up to $33, and then it would stay the same. And then it's going to increase by roughly $1 to $2 a year after that. Those are rounded off numbers, so it's $1 and change each year, basically, that those bills would go up. For your average residential customer using 6,000 gallons a month, you're going to increase by about $7 next year. And then after the rate freeze, after that, their bill would go up by about $3 to $4 a year. So it's really not much more than general inflation. You know, about 3% is about what we'd estimate for inflation. This is about 4%. And then this last line shows you a high residential user, 10,000 gallons a month. 6,000 is really the regional average as well as the average for Wooddale itself. But obviously there are some customers who use more than that on a monthly basis, or at least in the high months in the summer if they do a lot of lawn watering. And then this shows you, you know, that was the bottom line for your customers. This is the bottom line for the city, that your cash flow, your reserve that you've built up in your water and sewer fund is going to partially be used to offset some of these additional costs, some of your capital costs, and help you phase in the transition to repaying the EPA loan gradually as opposed to having to really up your rates a lot as soon as that payment kicks in. This helps you to draw down reserves a little bit to kind of ease the transition to higher rates for your customers. And you can see by year 5, the drawdown is kind of evening out. And so your revenues and your expenses are matching up pretty closely by that year. The spike you see in 2014, again, that's when you'd get reimbursed from the EPA for your engineering fees for the wastewater plant. So that's why you see a jump that year. And so that was it for the city's portion of things. I'm going to talk a little bit about the DuPage Water Commission and Chicago rate increases if nobody's got any questions about what came before. Okay.
Just a question, because I know the DuPage Water Commission thing could get a little harried. Wondering if you want to finish the presentation or just talk about the sewer treatment plant and vote on and give direction on the first 4, and then we'll finish up with the DuPage Water Commission, just so the conversations don't get confused with one another, because they really are 2 separate issues.
Okay, I'll bring it on the floor. We had a conversation about the bond rating and that. My recommendation, and there's been conversations about taking money out of reserve, pay for first phase, but after all my trips down Springfield for this treatment plant, I think the best bet for this council is right now is go after the bond, go out for bond, and we get our bond rating. So my proposal is follow direction, number 1, number 3, and 4 to go out for the bonds for phase 1. of $8 million, $9 million, $9 million for bonds for the first phase and go out for the bonds for that. Number 3 will be continue to purchase seek state revolving fund loan, interest loan funding for the less than $13 million, plus the $2 million for engineering. So I would definitely direct staff to go out for the bond rating for one of the 3 rating agency, SP, so I would recommend that they do the search and pick whatever bond rating they are. I will tell you that when we get to the final phase, they are going to request, down in Springfield, they are going to request on their document on how we're going to pay the loan back for phase 2 and all the other paperwork that we need to do to get down there for the application. So at this time, since we are almost ready to go with phase 1, I'll make the motion to approve item number 1, 3, and 4 at this time.
Second.
Any comments? All in favor? Alderman Roy Wesley.
I have a question about bonds. There's only 2 companies out there, Chapman and Moody. I just named both of them, I think.
SMBT.
The bond rating companies are S&P, Moody's, and Fitch.
Okay.
Predominantly S&P